First, I would like to thank you for inviting me. I feel very honored to be part of this conference. It's my first time in these beautiful buildings also. The Norwegian... Hey. What happened here? What? Oh. The Norwegian Sex Buying Act. Norway criminalized buying sex in 2009. I wonder whether you can make it bigger. He doesn't hear me. The main rationale for implementing the law from the 1st of January 2009 against commercial sex was to prevent and reduce human trafficking. Thank you. By making it illegal to buy sex, the Norwegian government also wanted to change attitudes in the population, to reduce the size of the Norwegian sex market by constraining supply and demand, and to prevent entry into prostitution and hence to reduce possible sexual exploitation of men and women in prostitution. The law also seeks to protect people in prostitution and to help people with the transition out of sex work. Five years after adopting the law, the Norwegian government wanted to evaluate its effect. The ban on purchasing sexual services is much debated in Norway, as my colleague Professor Matlari will tell you about. And it's a very complicated debate due to moral and ethical questions. There were worries that the law had resulted in negative side effects for people in prostitution. And I will come back to that. Our evaluation was commissioned by the Norwegian Ministry of Justice and Public Security in the autumn of 2013. And our work was done in the period January 2014 and June 2014, only a few months. But we were 4 or 5 people working on this, also together with organizations financed by the government. The main findings: the ban on purchasing sexual services has reduced demand for sex and thus contributed to reduced prostitution in Norway. The enforcement of the law, in combination with the laws against trafficking and pimping, makes Norway a less attractive country for prostitution based on trafficking than would have been the case if the law had not been implemented. We had laws against trafficking and pimping before the Sex Buying Act was introduced. The economic conditions for prostitution in Norway are worsened following the implementation of this law. And these effects, worsening the condition, not only for the traffickers but also for the prostitutes, are in line with the intentions of the law and are thus not considered as unintended side effects. We found no evidence of more violence against prostitutes after the ban on buying sex was implemented. But you have to be aware of the fact that there will always be violence. What we observed after being interviewing prostitutes and organizations was that the violence had changed from less strong violence, less rapes, to more weaker violence, but still violence. Estimates of the size and composition of the prostitution market is uncertain. In particular with regard to the indoor prostitution, where one person may have more than one unique advertisement online. There could be more announcements given by the very same prostitute under different names. Despite these data limitations, there's a clear declining trend in the market after the law was implemented. The market was at its lowest immediately after the introduction of the law and has stabilized later at a lower level than before 2008. The most profound changes are found in the Oslo street. Oslo is the capital of Norway. In the Oslo street prostitution market. Systematic field observations by the Pro Center, a private organization funded by the government, show that the size of the market today has stabilized at the level of 40 to 65% of the market before the law, which is also the experience in Sweden, which introduced the law, the similar law in 1999. The sources of information are the Pro Center. It's a private organization, as I said, funded by the government. They have been observing and counting street prostitutes as well as indoor prostitutes over many years, not only since the law was passed. Another source of information was the Church City Mission. They also observed and accounting street and indoor prostitutes. So we had to compare those two data sets. Also the research center, FAFU, sponsored by the trade unions, have also observed and counting street as well as indoor prostitutes. We also had interview with the police and also interview with the prostitutes and social workers. If you can see this graph, the bold blue line gives you the prostitute before the law was implemented in 2008. The data are daily data, night and day, from January to May. I only show the spring season. And the bold red line is what we observed in 2014, based on these sources of information that I mentioned. All graphs are based on the same sources. So we clearly see that there was a shift downwards in the number of street prostitutes in Oslo. I have to add that Oslo is not only the capital of Oslo, but the region is far the biggest population-wise in Norway. Almost close to 2 million people live in the area. Altogether, there are 5 million in Norway. Of course, the estimates are uncertain. One possible source of error in this data material is the timing of observations. That means when during the day and night observations have been made. And whether this timing varies over the years across the sources and in the time frame. However, the market shows the same tendencies also when its bias is controlled for. And actually, this was the contribution by us. We are all economists and econometricians doing this type of work, this work. But the observation had been collected not by economists, and I was a bit surprised that we were able to handle the data and come up with this conclusion. There was a debate in the beginning, but it has been silenced now. The street market in Bergen, Norway's second largest city, in Stavanger, the oil city in Norway, shows similar trends as Oslo after the introduction of the law. When the police have strategically targeted the market, we see a clear fall in the number of people in prostitution. And the law helped the police in their work against trafficking, as I will come back to. Another graph, the blue lines are the number of street prostitutes in Oslo before the law, and the red is after the law. We clearly see that just after the law was passed, there was a sharp decline in the number of prostitutes in Oslo. Lately, it has increased a bit, but it is at a lower level than before. The difference between the levels in the blue graph and in the red graph is significantly different from zero. So there was from a statistical point of view, there was a decline. But we have to observe that to introduce a law against purchasing sex does not eliminate prostitution, it reduces it. The indoor market. It was a fear that the Sex Buying Act may shift prostitution from the street to the indoor market. It has also been argued that it was difficult for us to find out about the indoor market. It was claimed that it was a hidden market. It could not be hidden. If it was hidden, the client would not be able to find the prostitutes. And in our world with the internet, they announce their services on the internet. And that was very helpful for us, and also for the police, of course. But estimates of the size of the indoor market are considerably more uncertain than the street prostitutes. But it's mainly due to the increasing rotation of the market. Because the traffickers, they rotate the prostitutes across regions of Norway, but also across countries. One day, one night, 1 week, the prostitute could be in Oslo. The next week, the next month, they could be in Copenhagen, and then they're coming back. Furthermore, it's normal to have several advertisements, as I said, connected to the same telephone number and to the same person, and also using the same website with different names. So we had to control for that when we were estimating the indoor market. But I have to admit, of course, that it was a bit difficult to come up with a correct estimate of the size of the market. According to informants in this branch of the prostitution market, the prices are lower than before, which we took as an indicator of less demand. What we also observed was that men and women in prostitution need to work harder now in order to secure the same income as before. They have to do more service, but there were fewer customers. Our analysis of the indoor market is that they are stabilized at a somewhat lower level than before. Our best estimate is that it has been reduced by 10 to 15%, which means that there was an overall reduction in prostitution in Norway, but the share of prostitutes in the indoor market has increased, the share. But this should be not confused with the levels. We also had to do a counterfactual study. We have to discuss what would have happened in Norway without the law 5 years later than 2008. As you all know, in 2008, there was a global financial and economic crisis. This led to negative consequences of the labor markets in a number of countries. Norway, on the other side, was not particularly affected due to good economic policies, good economists, and healthy state finances, and also, of course, because we are an oil and gas producing country, the second biggest exporter of gas to Europe, second after Russia. So it's a wealthy country. The large increase in the number of prostitutes in Norway in 2008 has to be seen in light of the financial crisis, which reduced the demand for sexual services in countries which are affected severely by the crisis. The whole continent. There was a higher unemployment in Europe, which may have created a market for more prostitutes because they were lacking alternatives in the normal labor market. As long as the possible profit from prostitution is higher in Norway than in other countries, one has to expect that the market for selling sex will increase in Norway. The developments in the rest of Europe with reduced revenues in the prostitution market would thus most likely have led to a larger share of prostitutes in Norway if the law had not been implemented. Without the law, the Norwegian police would also have lost an important tool for reducing human trafficking. Because with the law, the police used information from prisoned sex buyers to enforce the law on trafficking and pimping and pandering. They were simply waiting outside addresses of the indoor market and arrested and interviewed the clients when they left the hostels, etc. And they arrested also, not the prostitutes, but some of the traffickers because of this. Well, without the law, the traffickers would have faced a smaller risk of being caught, and the profit would have been higher. Again, we estimate with a high degree of uncertainty, but we have done our best, that the market in 2014 without the law would have been around 50% larger than the market in 2008 and around 35% larger than the actual market in 2014. So this was a counterfactual analysis. We also had a survey among men in Norway, and these surveys had also been conducted before the law was implemented. We found that young men in Norway, in particular young, and that's very promising, have changed their attitudes towards buying sex more than the older man. Because if the younger ones change their attitudes, this has an impact on the future attitudes. People in Oslo are more negative towards buying sex than other people in Norway. And that can, of course, has to do with the fact that there are more visible prostitution in Oslo than elsewhere. Also, interview with the police indicated the same, that there was a normative effect on people because of the law. Of course, it's a bit early to conclude, but our findings indicate the law has had an effect on attitudes. And this is also the conclusion in evaluations of a similar law implemented in Sweden in 1999. And attitudes changed gradually in Sweden towards being more skeptical towards prostitution. The ban on purchasing sex in combination with the ban on pimping and pandering have made it harder to sell sexual services in Norway. Especially if such activities are conducted in hotels and apartment collectives. The cost for the actors benefiting from others' prostitution have thus increased and the profit has been reduced. Taken together, this has affected the supply side of the market and contributed to less prostitution in comparison to a situation without the market, without the law. A reduced market and increased law enforcement pose a larger risk for human traffickers. The profit from human trafficking is also reduced due to these factors. The law has thus affected important pull factors and reduced the extent of human trafficking in Norway in comparison to a situation without the law. The working conditions of men and women in prostitution, of course, changed with the law. Women in the street market report have a weaker bargaining position and more safety concerns now than before the law was introduced. But if you like to crash the prostitution market and arrest traffickers, it has impact also on the prostitutes. At the indoor markets, prostitutes experience concern for outdoor calls. They prefer to have customers visit them at their own apartment, their own hotel room. But this changed a bit. The threshold for reporting a violent customer to the police also seems to be high after the law, but there was less rape, because rape perhaps would have been so serious also for the prostitute that they might have reported it, and they knew that purchasing sex was illegal. We have found no clear evidence of more violence against women in the street market after the introduction of the law, and the police also confirmed the same. And the violence changed from very hard violence to a bit weaker violence, but still there's violence. The prostitution market in Norway, like the rest in Europe, is characterized by an increasing share of immigrants from middle-income countries and poor countries. Most of these immigrants are women with few other options than to enter into prostitution. And human trafficking is a part of this rotating market. And the traffickers, they go for profit and exploit the situation in these markets where there are a lack of jobs, and traffic the prostitutes to the more wealthy parts of Europe. And Norway is one of the wealthiest. Given that the prostitutes have entered Norway, and given that we have passed this law, there's a need for providing more options for people that want to get out of prostitution. But we also be aware of the fact that many of these have been rotated away from Norway towards Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands because of the law. If you like to integrate, say, prostitutes in the labor market of Norway, the most important thing to do, according to immigration studies, is language classes, to learn the language. Even if almost all Norwegians speak English, it's important for the prostitute to learn English and to learn, in particular, Norwegian. Work training and work options are also important. Most of the prostitutes now in Norway, and also before the law, come from Nigeria, as I mentioned yesterday, like in Italy. Most of the street prostitutes, at least, in Norway, they come from Nigeria. They are channeled through Europe, from Spain and Italy, towards the north and rich part of Europe. But there are also many from Eastern Europe, but the labor market is not good. There's a lack of ordinary jobs, in particular in Bulgaria and Romania. Higher economic growth, more ordinary jobs, and better social policies in these countries may reduce prostitution in Europe. If some countries in the European Union allows for buying and selling sex, like in Germany, then sex buying acts in some countries, Sweden and Norway, Iceland, may shift prostitution to countries where buying is legal. And we have seen it already. The Sex Buying Act in Norway also punish Norwegian citizens buying sex abroad, but it's difficult to implement that part of the law, of course. But I have to say that one member, junior minister of the current government, was arrested when he bought sex in continental Europe after the law was passed. Even member of the government. He was a member of a populistic party, which has been, that party has been very much against the law. In order to curb trafficking and curb prostitution, I think some coordination at an international level is needed. As Vittorio Oslo suggested, perhaps we should go as far as to United Nations. Remember, trafficking of prostitutes is a global issue, like the climate change is a global issue. And in order to reduce it, you need some binding agreements across nations. Otherwise, the trafficker simply shifts the prostitute to parts of the world where buying sex is legal. And we could risk to create similar thing as to tax paradises, the paradises for sexual exploitation, as sex tourism. You like some graphs? I'm an economist. I will end my presentation with 3 graphs. This is the market for prostitution in the 1980s in Norway. The red line, the red curve, is the demand. This is a very simplified presentation on the market, though. And the blue one is the supply. It was completely national market, with very few foreigners. And it was regulated, controlled by the pimps and the prostitutes themselves. And there were many on using drugs among the prostitutes at the time. Also hard drugs like cocaine and heroin. And they regulated the market so that some prostitutes had the right to be in some streets and other prostitutes to be in other streets. So they regulated the market so they had a higher price than if this had been perfectly competitive. Then we went from a national market to a more competitive market with prostitutes and pimps coming from other countries. This happened in the late 90s. Again, the solid blue lines is the supply with Norwegian prostitutes only. The green line is the supply after the influx of foreign prostitutes. So, given the price, the supply curve was shifted to the right, meaning that given the price, there were more selling of prostitution in Norway. The red one is the demand. And we observe because of more prostitutes coming from abroad and more competition, prices went down. But still, prices in Norway were much higher than in the rest of Europe, because Norway is a very rich country. And finally, the green upward sloping curve is the supply after the law, and the dotted one is the supply without the law. So given that we introduced the law, prostitutes left Norway because the traffickers rotated them to other countries where there was no ban on purchasing sex. The dotted red line is the demand without the law, and the solid red is the demand after the law. And we clearly see that was a reduction in the sale of sex sold by prostitutes after the law. The impact on the prices is less certain. Lower demand, lower prices, lower supply raises it. But what was very certain was that it's a reduction in demand, and hence reduction in the sale of prostitution. Thank you so much.